come to you as one of many who are struggling to process what is happening to our great nation. I'm watching us lose our soul in real time. I'm watching cruelty become policy and compassion become weakness. I'm watching leaders who have chosen power over people, control over conscience, and I'm disgusted. Not just at what's being done, but at how easily we've been conditioned to look away. How quickly we've learned to justify the unjustifiable. How comfortable we become with the suffering of others as long as it doesn't touch our doorstep. This isn't politics anymore. This is a moral crisis. And if we don't find the courage to name it, to confront it, to reject it with everything we have, then we're complicit in the unraveling of everything this country was supposed to stand for.
They died seeking refuge. They died seeking due process. They died seeking medical attention that never arrived. 32 human beings lost their lives in immigration and customs enforcement detention centers during 2025. 32 souls extinguished while in the custody of the United States government. Not in war zones. Not in natural disasters. In detention centers on American soil facilities we fund with our tax dollars. Facilities operating under our Constitution. Facilities that have become, for too many, a terminal diagnosis. But let's be clear about what that silence protects. A system built on brutality. A leadership that has chosen cruelty as policy. This isn't negligence, this is calculated neglect. These deaths didn't happen in spite of the system. They happened because of it. When those in power strip away accountability. When they turn detention centers into death traps. When they treat human beings as disposable, that's not a failure of governance. That's a choice. And every day that choice goes unchallenged. Every moment the traditional media looks away. Every second we allow this silence to persist, we become complicit in the gross neglect of our shared humanity. And if you haven't heard about this crisis, if this number shocks you, if this reality disturbs the narrative you've been fed by the administration and traditional news media, that's precisely the problem we're about to dissect. This is ICE's deadliest year in over a decade, and the silence surrounding it by traditional media. Media that has capitulated to this administration is deafening.
Serious grown man in the studio, giving you my thesis, not the trends. That's my lane, and I'm driving in it. No shortcuts, just necessary stops along the way. Listen while you drive, and when you hit that red light, smash like and subscribe. If you get lost in the hustle and bustle of your day, lock back into Thesis of the World as you wind down your night. Welcome back to Thesis of the World. Let's get into it.
Welcome back to Thesis of the World. Please hit like and subscribe to help grow this platform. Now more than ever, facts and truth must not be suppressed. Today, I am here to do just that. Curate the truth from the manufactured narratives, to illuminate what gets deliberately obscured, to restore equilibrium to scales that powerful interests have tilted beyond recognition. My background spans criminal justice, military affairs, and corporate America. I've seen institutional machinery from multiple vantage points. I understand how systems protect themselves, how bureaucracies bury inconvenient truths, how language gets weaponized to distance us from human consequence. And what I'm about to share with you represents a fundamental betrayal of the principles this nation claims to uphold. See, we can debate immigration policy until we exhaust every talking point. We can argue about border security, about enforcement mechanisms, about the pace of asylum processing. Those are legitimate policy conversations with reasonable people holding different perspectives. But what we cannot debate, what we must not normalize, is the systematic devaluation of human life occurring within a detention infrastructure that has metastasized into a multi-billion-dollar industry accountable to shareholders rather than the Constitution. People are dying, not because of the inherent dangers of migration, not because of circumstances beyond governmental control. They're dying because of deliberate policy choices, because of systematic neglect, because we've constructed a detention apparatus designed to punish rather than process, designed to deter rather than uphold due process. And the architects of this system are counting on your ignorance. They're banking on media outlets prioritizing spectacle over substance. They're wagering that if they can keep these deaths statistical rather than personal, bureaucratic rather than visceral, you'll scroll past them without pausing. We're not doing that today. Today, we're bearing witness, we're demanding accountability. We're connecting the policy abstractions to the human devastation they produce. Because 32 deaths in 1 year isn't a statistic, it's a moral crisis. And it demands our attention. Let's establish the facts with precision, because precision matters when we're discussing human lives. According to data compiled by the National Immigration Justice Center and corroborated by ICE's own reporting they are legally obligated to provide, but often delay or obscure 2025, saw 32 confirmed deaths in ICE custody. This represents the highest annual death toll since 2010, and it shatters the disturbing trajectory we were already witnessing. But here's what those numbers conceal. The circumstances surrounding these deaths are as preventable as they are tragic. For instance, Jose Hernandez Menjivar, 35 years old, died in Stewart Detention Center in Georgia after repeatedly requesting medical attention for severe abdominal pain. His requests were documented. They were logged. They were ignored for 3 days until he collapsed. The official cause of death? Perforated ulcer leading to septic shock, a condition that, with timely intervention, has a survival rate exceeding 90%. 90%. Think about that. This man didn't die because medicine failed him. He died because a system designed to warehouse human beings rather than care for them failed him. He died because profit margins in privatized detention facilities reward understaffing. He died because medical neglect has been systematized, bureaucratized, rendered routine. Osmar Epifanio Gonzalez Godba, 32, died in Folkestone ICE Processing Center, also in Georgia, also operated by private prison corporation Geo Group, after spending weeks in solitary confinement. His family reported that he had been exhibiting signs of severe mental health deterioration. The official statement? Death by suicide. The unstated context? The use of prolonged isolation, a practice the United Nations has classified as torture when it exceeds 15 days in a facility where mental health services are virtually non-existent. We could continue this litany. 33-year-old Hernandez Rivera in Louisiana. 41-year-old Gonzalez Colon in New Mexico. Each name represents a family shattered. Each death represents a failure of the most fundamental governmental obligation to ensure the safety and well-being of those in its custody. But I want you to understand something crucial. These aren't isolated incidents. These aren't aberrations in an otherwise functional system. This is the system functioning exactly as it was designed to process human beings as efficiently and inexpensively as possible, while generating maximum returns for private corporations. A quota system. Stephen Miller ordered ICE to arrest 3,000 people a day to achieve 1 million deportations a year. The Government Accountability Office released a report in late 2024, conveniently buried in the news cycle, documenting that 70% of ICE detention beds are operated by private prison corporations. These companies have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to maximize profit. And in the detention business, profit maximization means cost minimization. That means fewer guards, fewer medical professionals, fewer mental health counselors, fewer oversight mechanisms. It means that human life becomes a line item to be optimized on a balance sheet. And when someone dies under these conditions, there's no criminal investigation. There's no independent review. There's an internal ICE inquiry that almost invariably determines no wrongdoing occurred, maybe a settlement paid to a family in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement, and then the machinery continues grinding forward. 32 deaths, 32 families, 0 accountability. That's not a broken system. That's a system working exactly as intended. Now let's examine the infrastructure that enables this catastrophe, because understanding the architecture is essential to dismantling it. The United States currently operates approximately 200 immigration detention facilities, housing an average daily population that fluctuates between 30,000 and 40,000 individuals. Some of these are purpose-built ICE facilities. Many are county jails that contract with ICE for detention beds. Others are privately operated, centers run by corporations like Core Civic and Geo Group companies that have spent millions lobbying for immigration enforcement policies that guarantee them a steady supply of detainees. Let that contradiction marinate for a moment. Corporations profit from detention. Therefore, corporations benefit from policies that increase detention. Therefore, corporations invest money in shaping those policies. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is publicly available lobbying expenditure data. This is the mechanism of regulatory capture playing out with human beings as the commodity. The conditions in these facilities have been documented exhaustively by human rights organizations. The ACLU, Human Rights Watch, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, all have produced reports detailing systematic abuses, medical neglect, sexual assault, denial of due process, prolonged detention without charge or hearing, use of solitary confinement as standard operating procedure. And here's the perverse brilliance of this system. These individuals exist in a legal gray zone. They're not serving criminal sentences. Most haven't been convicted of any crime. They're in civil detention, awaiting immigration proceedings. But they're subjected to conditions that would violate Eighth Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment if they were in the criminal justice system. The Supreme Court has held that constitutional protections apply to all persons on U.S. soil, regardless of immigration status. Yet the detention system operates as if these protections are suggestions rather than mandates. Why? Because enforcement is discretionary. Because oversight is minimal. Because the Office of Detention Oversight, the entity supposedly monitoring these facilities, is housed within ICE itself. That's right. ICE investigates ICE.
Oh my God!
The agency detaining people is the same agency determining whether those detentions meet constitutional standards. Imagine if police departments were solely responsible for investigating police misconduct with no external oversight. Actually, you don't have to imagine that. We've seen how that works out. Now, apply that same structural conflict of interest to an immigration detention system that processes hundreds of thousands of people annually, and you begin to comprehend the scale of the accountability vacuum. Medical care in these facilities is particularly catastrophic. A 2024 investigation by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General found that detention facilities routinely failed to provide constitutionally adequate medical care. Detainees with chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and HIV went without medication for weeks. Pregnant women were denied prenatal care. Individuals experiencing medical emergencies waited hours, sometimes days, to see a healthcare provider. And when medical neglect results in death, the families are often not even notified promptly. Jose Hernandez Menjivar's family learned of his death from a news report, not from official channels. They had to fight for weeks to get his body released for burial. This is the dehumanization encoded into the system's DNA. But here's what gives me a measure of cautious optimism. Documentation is accumulating. Whistleblowers are coming forward. Medical professionals, correctional officers, even ICE agents themselves are beginning to speak out about conditions they can no longer ethically tolerate. The question is whether we, as a society, will pay attention, whether we'll demand the structural reforms necessary to prevent next year from being even deadlier, whether we'll insist that the constitutional promise of equal protection actually means something, even especially for the most vulnerable among us. So why aren't you hearing about this on the evening news? Why isn't this generating the 24-hour coverage cycle we see for other governmental failures? The answer reveals as much about our media ecosystem as it does about the detention system itself. First, Consider the deliberate opacity built into ICE operations. Unlike criminal justice facilities, which are subject to state public records, laws, and relatively robust oversight mechanisms, immigration detention exists in a federal regulatory framework designed to minimize transparency. Media access is severely restricted. Journalists cannot freely interview detainees. Photography inside facilities is prohibited. Even congressional representatives have faced obstacles when attempting unannounced facility inspections. This isn't accidental. Opacity is a feature, not a bug. If the American public could see the conditions, could hear the testimonies, could witness the human cost firsthand, the political calculus would shift dramatically. So access is controlled, information is filtered, and what emerges is sanitized official statements rather than unvarnished reality. Second, there's the fundamental dehumanization embedded in how we discuss immigration. When the discourse centers on illegals rather than human beings, when we use language like alien to describe people, when we frame migration as invasion rather than the complex interplay of economic desperation, violence, and family separation, we create psychological distance. That distance serves a function. It allows us to tolerate conditions we would find intolerable if applied to people we recognize as fully human. It's the same psychological mechanism that has enabled atrocities throughout history to define the other as somehow less deserving of empathy, of rights, of life itself. And the media, with some notable exceptions, has largely adopted this framing. Immigration becomes a political football rather than a human rights issue. Deaths and detention become statistics, buried in paragraphs 12 and 13 of articles focused on border apprehension numbers or policy debates. Third, and this is where it gets particularly insidious, there's the privatization shield. When GO Group or Core Civic operates a facility where someone dies, they can hide behind corporate confidentiality. Internal incident reports become proprietary information. Staffing decisions become business strategy. And when advocacy organizations file Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain details about deaths in custody, they face years of litigation and heavily redacted documents. The public-private partnership that characterizes modern detention creates accountability gaps wide enough to drive a hearse through. But here's what the architects of this silence machine didn't anticipate. The internet, social media, decentralized information networks that can't be controlled the way traditional media gatekeepers could be managed. Families of the deceased are telling their stories on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. Former detainees are documenting conditions. Immigration attorneys are creating transparency through systematic documentation. And channels like this, one independent voices committed to illuminating rather than obscuring, are reaching audiences that mainstream outlets have abandoned. The information asymmetry that has protected this system for decades is collapsing. The question is whether enough people will pay attention, will care, will demand change before the next preventable death occurs. Because make no mistake, someone will die in ICE custody next week. Probably someone this week. The only question is whether we'll know their name, whether we'll honor their humanity, whether their death will catalyze the accountability that could prevent the next one. Righteous anger without strategic direction is just exhaustion waiting to happen. So let's talk about what accountability actually requires. What reforms could prevent future deaths? What mechanisms exist to transform this system? First, and most fundamentally, independent oversight. We need a truly external entity with unannounced inspection authority, subpoena power, and the ability to levy meaningful penalties for constitutional violations. Not an office within ICE, not a contractor hired by ICE, an independent body with investigative capacity and enforcement teeth. Several states have created models worth examining. California's oversight structure for state correctional facilities includes independent medical inspectors, mandatory reporting requirements, and civilian review boards. These mechanisms aren't perfect, but they've demonstrably reduced mortality rates and improved conditions. There's no reason this model couldn't be adapted for federal immigration detention. Second, end the privatization of human captivity. The profit motive is fundamentally incompatible with humane detention. When a corporation's quarterly earnings depend on cutting costs in facilities housing human beings, abuse isn't an aberration, it's an economic imperative. Several members of Congress have introduced legislation to phase out private detention contracts. These bills have stalled, predictably, because the private prison industry deploys lobbyists and campaign contributions with precision. But the momentum is building. Public opinion is shifting. The moral case against profiting from human detention is becoming undeniable. Third, alternatives to detention. The majority of individuals in immigration detention do not pose a public safety threat. They're awaiting asylum hearings. They're contesting removal orders. They're caught in bureaucratic backlogs that can stretch for months or years. Electronic monitoring, check-in requirements, community-based case management, these alternatives have compliance rates exceeding 90% at a fraction of the cost of detention. They're more humane. They're more effective. They're more economical. The only thing they don't do is generate corporate profits and create the illusion of tough enforcement for political consumption. Fourth, transparency and data. Mandate public reporting of all deaths, serious injuries, and medical emergencies in detention. Create a publicly accessible database with incident reports, investigation findings, and disciplinary actions. Sunshine remains the most effective disinfectant. And fifth, accountability for officials. When medical neglect results in death, when constitutional violations are documented, when systematic abuse is proven, there must be consequences. Criminal prosecution, where warranted, civil liability that can't be shielded by qualified immunity or corporate structures, professional decertification for administrators who oversee facilities where abuses occur. None of these reforms are radical. None require reimagining the fundamental structure of immigration enforcement. These are basic accountability mechanisms that we apply imperfectly but genuinely to other governmental functions. The resistance to applying them to immigration detention reveals everything you need to know about who this system is designed to serve and who it's designed to exploit. 32 deaths in 2025, each one preventable, each one a moral indictment of a system that has prioritized efficiency over humanity, profit over constitutional obligation, political theater over due process. We can choose to normalize this. We can accept that some lives matter less, that some suffering is the acceptable cost of immigration enforcement, that the Constitution applies selectively based on documentation status. Or we can recognize this for what it is, a profound betrayal of the principles we claim to cherish. I don't have the luxury of pretending these are abstract policy questions. My background in criminal justice, my time in military service, my years navigating corporate structures, all of it has taught me that systems reflect choices. They reflect priorities. They reflect what we're willing to tolerate and what we insist on changing. And right now, we're tolerating the intolerable. But documentation is accumulating. Testimonies are mounting. The silence is fracturing. And when enough of us decide that constitutional protections must mean something real, that human dignity cannot be liquidated for corporate profit, that deaths and government custody demand accountability, the political calculus will shift. That's not naive optimism. That's historical precedent. Every reform that has ever constrained governmental abuse of power has emerged from this same pattern. Documentation, exposure, sustained pressure, political courage, meeting public demand. We are in the documentation phase. We are creating the evidentiary record that will make denial impossible and inaction unconscionable. Your role in this is straightforward. Bear witness. Share this information. Refuse to let these deaths be memory holed by the news cycle. Contact your representatives and demand the oversight, the transparency, the accountability that could prevent next year from being even deadlier. Because Jose Hernandez Menjivar's family deserves to know why their loved one died seeking medical attention that should have been readily available. Osmar Gonzalez Gadba's family deserves to know why mental health deterioration went unaddressed until it became fatal, as well as those families before them. Now, let's round the curve and bring it home. And the next person who will die in ICE custody, someone whose name we don't yet know, whose story hasn't yet been written, that person deserves a system that values their life enough to prevent their death. Justice delayed is justice denied. But justice, abandoned justice, rendered meaningless by systematic abuse and institutional indifference, that's something else entirely. That's the America we have right now. But it doesn't have to be the America we keep. If this investigation resonated with you, if you believe accountability matters, subscribe to Thesis of the World. We curate the stories that mainstream outlets ignore, we illuminate the truths that powerful interests obscure, and we keep fighting to balance scales that have been tilted for far too long. Join me for the next chapter and topic on Thesis of the World, the conflicts, the contradictions, the controversy, and the dialogue. I see the numbers watching but are forgetting to subscribe, so smash that like button for this video or videos you watch, and subscribe to help grow this online platform. The algorithm will respond in kind by pushing the video or videos to like-minded viewers. It's no surprise that traditional media is compromised and seek to dismantle our democracy and eradicating our First Amendment rights. The only way to get the truth out is by independent media, protesting, holding them accountable, and voting to have them unseated. Until we meet again, let the echoes of freedom break through the silence and chaos. Remind them who we are and that we will never surrender, even if we surrender to ourselves for a short period of time. As the world turns, let it finally turn favorable towards the middle class.
Thank you for locking back into Thesis of the World. Serious grown man in the studio, driving in my lane, giving you the thesis, not the trends, seeing the world through different prisms. If this helped you see this diaspora a little clearer, or made you pause and rethink, pass along my coordinates. And most important, smash like and subscribe. Don't exit without choosing a direction. It helps grow this platform. And the algorithm will respond in kind by pushing this to more like-minded viewers. Until we meet again, let the echoes of freedom break through the silence and the chaos. Remind them who we are, and that we will never surrender, even if we surrender to ourselves for a short period of time. I'll see you at the next stop, and I'm out.